Welcome to a Red Velvet Ninja's Guide for Phageborn Convergence, a boss in the genetic archives. You will want 3 to 4 tanks, 4 healers, and depending on the type of boss you get, you may want a CC break, a movement ability, 1 tiered up interrupt, a cleanse, and a second interrupt. So every week you will enjoy this encounter differently. This encounter you will be dealing with 4 out of the possible 5 bosses, and based on which combination you have decides the strategy that you will use. Each boss has its own separate health pool and has standard abilities as well as intermission abilities. So let's talk about each boss individually first. Hammer is a simple tank and spank with a frontal cleave, so all DPS should be standing behind him. Hammer does root the tank and performs a powerful slam that must be shared with the DPS. Once the slam is complete, it's back to business as usual. During Hammer's intermission, he teleports to the middle of the room and starts casting his Raid Wiper that has 20 interrupt armor. Each interrupt deals raid-wide damage. To counter this, set up an interrupt order and have a steady, controlled series of interrupting. It has to be fast enough to interrupt the cast, but slow enough to give the healers enough time to keep everyone alive. Expect to die a few times learning this. After completing the intermission, you will receive a moo on all the bosses. Sword. This monster completely changes the fight's mechanic. Sword spams 2 abilities. 1, Rot, a wave that is shot out towards other bosses and should be called out, so groups dealing with their own bosses are aware of the wave of death heading their way. Sword also likes to equalize his health with that of the other bosses in this encounter, so that's fun. Sword also has an ability to summon eye stalks that have a frontal cone around them, but rotate in a 360. Be aware that when you're dodging the eye stalks, that Sword could still be casting Rot. For Sword's intermission, he teleports to the middle of the room and spawns 4 pillars. Each one of these have to be destroyed. You could assign DPS to each pillar, if that's what you wish. After completing this intermission, you will receive a moo on all the bosses. Alright, well that's 2 down and 3 bosses to go. Frog isn't anything special to the other bosses. Carbine must have felt lazy with this guy. Frog has a mechanic that creates spores if you attack from far away, basically making him a melee-specific boss. Frog does cast 2 different abilities that only need 1 interrupt armor to handle, so make sure he doesn't get any of those casts off. Frog's intermission teleports him to the middle of the room. He puts up a protective shield and does a quick knockback. The goal is simply to burn off the shield and the intermission is over. Everyone should stack up to maximize buffs. After completing the intermission, you will receive a moo on all bosses. Squid. The only reason you need a CC break in this fight. Squid isn't tanked at any point during this fight, he just floats around casting egg stuff. Randomly, a person in the raid will be changed into an egg, which needs to be DPS down to free them, or use a CC break to get out, or just die. All totally valid ways to get out of the egg. Squid's intermission teleports him to the middle of the room and disarms everyone. Once disarmed, you start taking dot damage, until you pick your weapon up. The damage isn't much, so don't worry about it. The red telegraphs will also disarm you in case you wanted to pick your weapon up. During this time, Squid has a cast going on that needs to be interrupted. So the best way to handle this is have everyone swarm Squid, use their CC break, and immediately interrupt his cast. The window for everyone to interrupt is very small, so have your raid leader do a countdown. After completing this intermission, you will receive a moo on all the bosses. Finally, the last boss. Legs would be the job for the range to handle. Legs has a permanent telegraph around him that reduces healing by 100% and deals damage. Legs does have a disease that will be cast on a nearby player that can be spread to others. Healers responsible for Legs must have a cleanse on their bar. Finally, Legs also has a heal that he likes to cast that needs to be interrupted. It has 4 interrupt armor. For intermission, Legs will teleport to the middle of the room and summon a bunch of small strained babies, I guess, floating around the room. Kill them all and receive your moo. So now on to the combinations. Oh my god, will be here forever. If Sword is involved, the majority of the DPS stays on Sword and abuses his health equalization to effectively DPS down all the bosses. Start slowing down around 7% to ensure that all the bosses are very low and then go for a kill. If you have Sword and Hammer, life gets interesting. We have our tank NASCAR Hammer in a huge circle around the room and have the DPS continue to stay on Sword. Hammer does still have his initial slam, so be sure to eat that with the tank at the beginning of the encounter, before heading over to Sword. If there is no Sword, go directly to Hammer and wipe him out. Then send melee over to Frog and ranged over to Legs. Typically, we'll use moves to burn down Squid. The reason these bosses have to be killed so systematically is because when 2 of them die, the remainders all go into an enrage. So that's Phageborn Convergence. It's an encounter that is very involved. Based on what you have every week will dramatically change your build, so make sure you know what you're walking into on the pull. With proper planning and coordination, this fight is manageable. There is no DPS race, so take your time and don't get sloppy. And that wraps it up for this encounter. If this video helped you, please drop it a like. For any questions, please use the comments below. Of course, subscribe to this channel for more WildStar raid videos and entertainment, or visit us on redvelvetninjas.com.